Welcome, everyone, to Leaving Nothing Undared, a podcast from Oblate School of Theology Continuing Education, where we dive deep into spiritual and theological insights of leaders in faith and formation. I'm your host, Antonio Fritzi, Director of Continuing Education here at Oblate, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined by Father Ron Rolheiser. For those of you who may not be familiar with Father Ron, he's a Roman Catholic priest and a member of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. He has served as the president of Oblate School of Theology, and he remains a full-time faculty member. He's known across the globe for his contributions to theology, spirituality, and contemporary religious thought. Father Ron is also an award-winning author, and his weekly columns are read by thousands worldwide. Today, we'll be talking about his upcoming lecture series entitled Living a Mystically Driven Life, Spiritual Wisdom from the Deep Wells of Christian Mysticism, a topic that has fascinated spiritual seekers for centuries. Let's dive in. Father Ron, welcome. We're honored to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So we'll get right into it. Father Ron, mysticism is often seen as something that's mysterious, maybe even unattainable for the average person. Could you start us off by telling us what mysticism really is and how it could be a part of anyone's spirituality?
Right. Like you, as you said, for most people, it means something extraordinary. You know, mystical experience, you have revelations or whatever, angels talk to you. That's not what it means at all, the French have a word called mystique. Mystique means there's something under the surface that you're kind of getting, but it's special, but it's not extraordinary. So mysticism's really not having extraordinary experience, but being really in touch with what's deepest inside of you. We use the word sincerity. When are you sincere? Well, it's hard to come to sincerity. Kind of like you have so many levels of who you are and ideologies. And when do you ever have a clear moment, say, this is who I am. This is what life means. Then you're sincere. That's also mysticism. But they take the word from the word meson in Greek, which really means there's a mystique. There's something deeper inside of you than meets the surface. But it's not extraordinary. It's really the most real part of you.
Wonderful. So it sounds like rather than this kind of esoteric experience beyond anyone's capacity, this is something, mysticism, that's available to anyone engaged in the spiritual life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It seems also that one of the helpful ways of coming to understand mysticism is to look at some examples of people who've really practiced it. And my understanding is that you've chosen to focus on two mystics in particular in this lecture series, and I know certainly in other areas of your work, Therese of Lisieux and Henri Nouwen. Can you talk a bit about why you chose these figures and what their spiritual insights might offer us today?
Well, as you know, in my teaching, I do major courses on John of the Cross. But John of the Cross wrote 500 years ago. I chose Therese and Henri Nouwen because they're contemporary, and you can read them. The average person can't read John of the Cross. You need a course. It's old language. It's 500 years old and so on. Whereas Therese or Henri Nouwen, you can pick up the books and read them. I was drawn to Henri Nouwen when I was a theology student, reading him, and I felt like I was being introduced to myself. I came to Therese later because then for a long time I resisted her. I thought, the little flower, what's she got to say? And then I was goaded into reading her by some friends, and as soon as I started reading her, I said, whoa. That if you want to read what sincerity is and you want to really get touched deeply, she cuts through all the garbage in your life and gets to I'll just give you one example. I had a friend, my own age, psychologist, who was a very close friend for a long time. And he wasn't particularly religious, and he was dying of cancer in hospice. And people brought him books. I brought him Therese of Lisieux. And one time he said to me, it's the only thing I can still read. He said, when you're dying, she cuts the crap out of everything. you get to the essence of things. And so, but I treat them because they're contemporary. People will get them more in a full length course. I would do John of the Cross or some classic mystic.
Yes, indeed. It sounds like both Henri Nouwen and Therese of Lisieux, one of the appealing elements of them as subjects is their accessibility. And I think that goes a long way to demonstrating your point that mysticism is something that's accessible to everyday folk and indeed people who are more contemporary. It's not something we need to search too far into the past to discover. You noted that Therese of Lisieux has this really compelling spirituality that brings us back to kind of what's essential. And I know she's known in part for her little way, right? This approach to holiness through everyday acts. Can you explain to me how that kind of awareness of the everyday relates to mysticism as a practice?
Well, the little way is very much misunderstood. The same as Therese is very much misunderstood. I always say, the unfortunate part of Therese of Lisieux is we've encrusted her with so much piety that the ordinary people get turned off, But underneath, you have this pure soul, and her, she can just she was a young woman with probably a graded education. So it's a little like reading a diary of Anne Frank. She just speaks directly to you, and there's a transparency and a clarity there that's stunning, Like this man said, when you're dying, you're pretty, not many things speak to you anymore. So that speaks to you. She touches you at the deepest part. So she kind of triggers mysticism in you. She tries to, her strength is she gets you to that deep point inside of you, beyond all the word sincerity in Latin, some two words say sine gere, which means without wax. She gets through all the wax to that's her strength. Nouwen does that too in a very direct way. You read them and they cut through all the BS, if I can use a word, and all of a sudden you realize this is who I am. This is what's true.
Right, indeed. And, I've hoped to ask you, in fact, about Henri Nouwen, because as we've heard that Therese of Lisieux is often misunderstood, and she really cuts to those poignant, human, and meaningful moments of an individual's life. I'd love it if you could similarly speak to what makes Henri Nouwen so compelling and what mystical insights he might offer the modern world.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, about both of them, they are literary geniuses. A lot of people have the same experience, but it's like the diary of Anne Frank. Thousands of young girls write diaries, but hers stands out not just because she was in Nazi, hiding from the Nazi, but there's a clarity. There's a clarity. It's like a literary or an artistic genius. See, so for instance, Nouwen was writing in his third language, English. He was Dutch, French, and all of us writing English. We can only envy him. How can he write like that? There's just the transparency. But what makes him so compelling is Nouwen was a deeply wounded man, and there was a whole unwholeness to him, and yet he was a saint, and that somehow in his writings he can relate to that. I don't want to be disparaging, but for instance, a lot of people, as much as we admire Mother Teresa, a lot of people say, I can't do that. Who can do Mother Teresa? You read Henri, say, I can do that. I can do that. And he kind of shows you how you do it inside of all your eroticism and all your obsessions. How do you link on to God and stay there in church and so on? I often tell students that maybe you can't do Mother Teresa. I think you can do Henri Nouwen.
Beautiful. Yes, so indeed, Henri Nouwen, right, along with Therese of Lisieux, but they present these kind of human figures that offer models for us on how to engage the mystical life and indeed express this spiritual dimension of our shared experience. Some of the people who choose to attend these lectures may be very new to mysticism, And indeed, as we noted at the top, while these will be two very accessible figures, some people might be intimidated by the concept of mysticism.
Yeah.
So I would ask, how do you suggest that people who are new or perhaps unfamiliar with mystical practices start incorporating some element or dimension of mysticism into their everyday spiritual lives?
First of all, listening to you now, I probably should have named it something different. We should have named it Demystifying Mysticism, like demystifying, because like you said, most people think it's exotic, it's extraordinary, and so on. It's not, so how do we? I'll put it this way: going through like definitions of mysticism and what it really is, and looking at people like Nouwen, looking like people at Therese of Lisieux, what it offers you, it's going to get you in touch with your real self. You're going to say, what's deepest, what's truest inside of me? Because that's hard to do in our culture. We're all over, like, who am I really? What do I really believe? A lot of times we got to be driven to that center, like my friend who was dying. When you're dying, you're driven to your center. All of a sudden, everything that's superficial melts away. When we're on, living our lives or watching television, social media, so a lot of times we're not close to our center, a little humor, but with a message. One year I was teaching a course in mysticism, and the first night I'd go around the room, I'd say, like, why are you taking this course? And one woman stunned the class, said, because I am a practicing mystic. They lit up, but she's actually right. The same as you can be a practicing artist, you can be a practicing musician, we're meant to be practicing mystics, which means you're meant all the time to try to drive to that deep place inside of you. What's the truest inside of you, Antonio? Who's the true Antonio? And sometimes we can all look and say, I don't know. I know what I think, and what other people think, and so on. Where do you get to that raw, naked? Thomas Merton called it the virgin point inside of you. Where this is you, this is what's true, and see these people like Therese, Henri, Nouwen, they'll help lead you there. They'll help lead you there. You sort through everything in a certain point, and this is what's real. And it's not exotic. It's not exotic. For instance, you've read Henri now, there's not an exotic thing in him,
Indeed, he's remarkably accessible, certainly more accessible than I thought he would be before entering into some of his texts. Mm-hmm. So that experience, along with this conversation, is very reassuring, of course, to me. And I would hope to our audience to learn that mysticism is something that we really can all engage with. It's not something that's just for scholars or those we already recognize as saints. So I think this is one of the things that is probably really going to draw people to this lecture series. But I do want to ask Father Ron, we've discussed Therese of Lisieux, we've discussed Henri Nouwen, and both of them are examples, along with some of the stories that you've told, of how personal this mystical journey can be. So I'm wondering, as someone yourself who has studied and taught theology, spirituality, and mysticism for a few years, how has your understanding of mysticism evolved over time?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, it evolved from an aversion to it. As a young priest and young theologian, I had zero interest, because to me it meant the exotic, it meant extraordinary experience and so on. And I was led to John of the Cross through actually a Protestant writer, Langdon Gilkey, who wrote this marvelous book in the early 70s called Naming the Whirlwind, which he kind of analyzed American culture. He said, we're going through a dark night of the soul as a culture. And that intrigued me. So I could learn about dark nights of the soul. So I started with John of the Cross. Of course, I was reading Henri Nouwen, not thinking of him as a mystic. I started reading Henri Nouwen in my 20s because as a 20-year-old, with all the energy inside of you, he was helping me sort this out, and I only came to Therese, another 20 years later, and so on. So it's evolved where now, you know what the title of the lecture series is called? The Mystically Driven Life. And I stole that partly. We're all familiar with Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life, which he sold 50 million copies of that. It's a good book, but basically, so what I'm going to propose, the Mystically Driven Life, is you got to get in touch with that deep part of yourself and you live your life out of that, you know? And so many times when you make a decision, don't say, what do I want to do here? Or what I think is the wise thing to do. What do I have to do here? What do I have to do here? What's the deepest part of me? Maybe I won't even like doing it. And call them, what do I have to do? You know, and see, then you're living a mystically driven life. You're coming out of that, what's truest inside of you. Because what we like and what we think is smart on a certain day, that'll shift and so on.
Beautiful. But that which is true in us, right, is that which remains, and something that we can turn to repeatedly, and perhaps even at some unexpected moments. So one of the final questions that I'll ask you is hopefully a little more lighthearted. We've covered a number of really interesting, insightful areas of mysticism, but I'm hoping that you might speak to, given all your years of study, do you ever, or have you ever, found yourself having that real sense of the mystical experience in more mundane or perhaps unexpected places in your life?
Yeah, you know, in fact, that's usually where it's going to hit you. You know, mysticism is not going to necessarily hit you at church when we're trying to pray and so on. It might be at a funeral. It might be at a wedding. It might be you pick up or you see just the energy of a 2-year-old. You know, like for instance, I'm 75 years old now. You know, never had children of my own, but sometimes today I look at toddlers and their innocence and stuff and their energy just stuns you. It focuses you. It cuts away all the BS. You know, so see, so mysticism usually it's not inside of a church, or even you're looking at a sunset. That's kind of the, you know, like the beer commercial. You're on the beach and you're looking at the sunset and so on. Like usually it's like you use the word mundane. You're looking at a toddler, you know, or you're looking at somebody crying at a funeral, or you're looking at, you know, these types of things, or just somebody at a wedding or wherever, you know, that can bring you to your true self. And it normally happens more like that than in a chapel, or it can happen praying and so on. But usually it's going to surprise you. It's an experience that it stuns you. And all of a sudden it cuts away all the BS in your life. And you just realize what's at the center of life. Lately, I'm getting at more just watching toddlers, like little kids who can't even talk, but just their energy and so on, and the innocent stuff that's there. And you say, wow, you know, what's important in this life?
Incredible. So it sounds, I mean, it sounds that this opportunity to spend these evenings with you and explore a mystically driven life is indeed an opportunity to learn how to come home to ourselves in many instances and recall what's important. I would hope, as you've explained to us today, that we remember that mysticism is accessible to us.
Yeah.
Right? We have individuals like Therese of Lisieux and Henri Nouwen who can model the powerful presence of God and the life of the Spirit in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
Thank you, Father Ron, for sharing these insights with us. We look forward to
I'm looking forward to having a bunch of practicing mystics come.
Okay. Absolutely. They're more than welcome.
Thanks, you. Antonio.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. It's clear that this lecture series is going to be an incredible opportunity to explore mysticism in a way that's both enriching and accessible. For those of you watching or listening, don't miss out on this chance to dive deeper into these spiritual treasures. Father Ron's lecture series on mysticism will be held on 3 consecutive Wednesdays, October 2nd, 9th, and the 16th, from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. at the Whitley Event Center here at the Oblate School of Theology campus. For all 3 evenings with Father Ron, the registration fee is $60. You can also attend this series virtually and can register and pay online by visiting our website, www.ost.edu. Thank you for joining us today on Leaving Nothing Undared. I'm Antonio Fritzi, and we hope to see you at the Rolheiser Lecture Series. Until next time, God bless you.